mode. Hello and welcome to Pathways to Positive Futures webinar series. I'm just going to go over a few things about using the webinar program. If you could keep your cell phones, iPads, and things like that away from the computer, and also close any of your file sharing applications like your Pandoras or Spotifys or anything like that. Those can sometimes interfere with the audio of the webinar. And if you have any concerns about the audio, you can check your own audio panels, or you can also send a message through the question box, and some of us over here on the technical assistance side might be able to help you. You're going to be on mute until hopefully time at the end with Q&A, but if you do not want to actually verbalize your question through the raise your hand function, you can also just chat a question in the question box, and I will be able to see it. So that's it, and without further ado, I'm going to present to you Eric Lulo, who is going to present this webinar on strategic sharing.
Great. Thank you so much for the opportunity to present this webinar here. Strategic sharing is one of the most important things that young people be trained and prepped in before doing advocacy work. It's really fortunate that we have this capability to present this information to you guys via a webinar format, because there's very few people that actually do trainings in strategic sharing in our country. And so it's something we want to make that's more prevalent, more noticeable, and important that young people access. And currently trying to access the controls here. Sorry, having little technical difficulties with advancing the slides. There we go. All right, so what we have done is we, National Federation of Families, Youth Move National, and Portland Resource and Training Center, Pathways, have developed a guide around strategic sharing for young people to access that will help them develop their capabilities to share their stories. And give you guys a little bit of background on myself here. All right, so I work as Youth Involvement Associate with the National Federation of Families, and my role there is to help train and prep and prepare young people for doing various kinds of advocacy work. In addition to my professional experience, my personal experience is actually I am an alumni from the child welfare, foster care, and mental health systems, and so I definitely understand what it's like to share personal parts of my story with individuals, and so I thought it was important to develop a guide around this, and what this guide is going to cover actually is what you see here, which is just we're gonna talk about the history of strategic sharing, how it was developed, why that was important that it was developed, and some of the backstory on that, and then we go into like the actual training components of it, where it's why do you want to share, like identifying your reason for sharing, what's your motivation behind that, talking about some of the positive and negative reasons to share, and then benefits and risks of sharing and how to weigh those things out, and then how to prepare for each and every event. So all the steps you need to take prior to doing an engagement that would help you be more effective and keep you safe. And then just some general tips about being strategic, and then we'll actually talk a little bit about some of the additional features of the guide. So the history of strategic sharing. Now, strategic sharing really came about out of the foster care alumni movement. First, people might be wondering what strategic sharing actually is. And what it is it's a method of safely and effectively telling your personal experience in order to achieve a goal. So it's about how to get your point across effectively to create the positive change that you want to see happen, while at the same time protecting your own social and emotional well-being. And so, as I mentioned earlier, this was brought out of the foster care alumni movement, and the first guide around strategic sharing was actually created by Casey Family Programs and the Foster Care Line of America, and there's a picture of it there. And at the end of this webinar, you'll actually be given a link for accessing their guide. But since then, the National Resource Center for Youth Development has actually also created a short guide around strategic sharing. Each of these are, I think the first one's about 12 pages long. This one's about, the next one's about 7 pages long. Our guide is a bit more comprehensive. It's actually going to be close to like 35, 36 pages long. It'll be coming out here in the summer, and so we're really looking forward to that. It's a much more in-depth, more comprehensive guide that'll really help prepare young people for each and every engagement that they do. So a little bit about the importance of strategic sharing. I want to take you to a scenario where this might come up, and so imagine like you're at a school, and like some of the things that are happening is that your young people need to get service hour, volunteer hours as they're preparing for graduation, and one of the ways that they can do that, and here enters our young girl, Tiffany, who is concerned because she has to get service hours on top of everything else she's going to be doing, so she wants to do something, and she gets presented with a opportunity to share her story in a public setting by signing up and being a part of Youth Move. Some of you might be familiar with Youth Move. It's the organization that I'm with, and so she wonders what Youth Move is, and so let's see how this plays out. So Molly here is telling Tiffany that Youth Move is a youth-led advocacy group, where you share your experiences on issues around juvenile justice, foster care, all that kind of stuff. A lot of really personal information, goes out when you are doing this advocacy work, and so Tiffany is a little bit worried about some of this, but she definitely wants to participate, but she's concerned about putting her personal hours out there. So, hey Molly, how are you? What do you need? Yes, I totally could tell Tiffany a little bit more about how she can safely and effectively tell her story. That's what our whole guide around strategic sharing is about. I didn't realize that you guys could hear me as well too. This is interesting. All right. So some of the reasons for sharing your story, this is the first part of the guide, is identifying what your reason is for becoming an advocate and choosing to put all that personal information out there. One, it helps promote change, and two, it helps keep you better protected. So this is some of the positive reasons for learning strategic sharing. It creates that change, and it keeps you better protected. They're like, social and emotional well-being bodyguards is how I like to describe it. And so, glad you like this idea, Tiffany. Let's get into like the real work here now. All right. Slides are, there we go. There we go. Okay. So how can our stories promote change? One of the reasons we want to tell our experiences because it can really help foster a lot of change in our communities, in our state, and even on a national level, because our stories really have the ability to affect policy and implementation of that policy, influence just changes in services and practices on a local level, as well as dispel negative stereotypes. So I always tell young people, whenever you're doing any kind of advocacy work, you want to do it in such a manner that lets people know that a lot of the stigma and things around young people in care just really aren't true. And then it helps you to establish your credibility and create that emotional appeal from people. So when I tell my personal story as a young person who's experienced like child welfare systems, for example, it establishes that credibility because I know what those systems are like because I've experienced those systems. And the emotional appeal comes from those personal stories, and when people can hear them, they really are impacted by that, and they get inspired to create those changes. It can help us build relationships, engage and interact with other people who've had similar experiences from ours. Currently, I'm in Washington, D.C. and the East Coast, and now I'm integrated with folks over on the West Coast. because of these experiences and opportunities to work with other folks. And two, our stories can really help generate funding from the general public. I mean, a lot of Casey Family Programs, for example, really comes from the funding for all the initiatives that they take on, which is millions of dollars, comes from UPS, the United Postal Service. And so these folks are very passionate about that because of the personal stories and experiences they've heard, and because their founder actually had experienced the foster care system. And so these are great ways to create that change. So how does strategic sharing keep you better protected? One of the things that it does is it helps you learn to weigh out the risks and benefits of sharing your story. You can determine like your own comfort level, like with what you feel comfortable sharing, what you don't feel comfortable sharing, who you feel comfortable sharing that with, and who you don't. You develop a safety plan around your individualized triggers. That could be triggers to your emotional stability and well-being, and develop a plan around meeting those needs. It teaches you how to deal with difficult questions that are asked by the audience, so ways to like reframe things and stuff. We'll get into all this in a minute. And then also debriefing and processing your feelings after you share. And then it also helps prevent you from being exploited or being tokenized. A lot of times, organizations really want to bring young people to the table, but they don't necessarily know how to do that effectively. And so they just get them there, but then they're not prepped, they're not trained, all those kind of things. So the participation is really limited as a result of that. Now, the first section of the guide is really what is your reason for sharing? So why are you deciding to share? Why is it important for you to share? And what we do is we look at some of the different components that young people, one of the reasons why they share, whether it's a positive reason, like they're advocating for themselves, they're advocating to reduce stigma in the community around mental health, foster care, juvenile justice issues, or they're doing community advocacy work and focusing on like program changes, policy changes, and things like that. These are some of the positive reasons for sharing. Some of the negative reasons for sharing could include like exploitation. They're just asked to present and to come and do an event. They don't really know what's going on, what's happening. One, attention-seeking behavior, and this is actually something that's I was guilty of in the past, where it's you feel important, things like that. So you like the attention that you get from folks. And lastly, anger, an anger reason. Something negative or bad has happened to you, and you're really upset about that. So you're choosing to share your story because you want to feel like you're being heard, because you're ticked off and you want those changes to happen. And so what we do know is you can kiss more flies with honey than you can with vinegar, and so we want to make sure that young people can address some of the negative components to sharing your story. All right, so here's some of the negative reasons for sharing. Like exploitation, you're sharing because you feel like you have to because someone else told you to or asked you to even. A lot of times young people are working with adult organizations and such that have control over their lives and where things happen. Like if you're in the child welfare system and your caseworker asks you to come to an event, it's kind of hard to feel like you can say no to that because this is a person in a position of authority and power over your life, and so you want to make them happy, things like that. So our guide actually talks about this issue and gives examples of things that you can do to address an exploitation issue in a positive manner to avoid that from being what your reason for sharing is. Second, we have anger here. Like I said before, sometimes people share their stories because they're angry about what happened to them, or they want justice or even retribution. And we do know is that anger causes increased stress levels, things like that. So we definitely don't want young people to be overwhelmed and to be stressed out, because that can be emotional triggers to their mental health and stability. And so we talk about some of the different ways that you can address an anger reason. And then attention seeking, when you're a young person and you feel like your voice hasn't been heard, or you feel like you're lesser than other people because of the things that like you've been through, and then when you start doing advocacy work, here there's hundreds of people that are listening to what you have to say. People really value you and your participation, and so you're really in the spotlight, and you kind of become like a mini celebrity, and that's something that can get very addictive, and it's something that if you're not taking the necessary precautions, you can actually overshare, you can burn out, you can really cause a lot of negative impact to your own well-being as a result of that need or that craving for people's respect and attention. So we talk about how to address some of those issues in addition. And so some of the things that we do to address like an exploitation reason is talk to the people or person who is asking you to share your experiences. Ask questions to better understand the topic, because when you understand like what the purpose of the event is, you know whether or not you agree with that end result or that goal or purpose. And if you feel uncomfortable, simply say no and just walk away if it's not something that you want to do. So we talk to young people about how they can do these things more appropriate and effective. If it's like an anger reason, wait until you've had the chance to calm down from that experience. Seek help from a professional, talk to a counselor, things like that, or the stuff that we talk about in our guide around addressing an anger reason, and also checking the facts. I'll give you a quick example of this, which is also in the guide as well too. When I first started doing advocacy work, I had a very negative experience with an adoption process having gone wrong, and I was adopted in my teens, and so I was really a strong advocate for transitional services, independent living services, rather than adoption. I thought, when you start pushing young people towards adoption, it's really like forcing a marriage and forcing a bad relationship. And so, but that was based upon my own negative experiences. And as I got older and started looking at the facts, I realized, well, for youth who are adopted, they experience much better outcomes in life than those who aren't. And so I had to definitely change my process around things, and the facts really helped me to see the clarity on that. And so that's one of the ways that you can address those anger reasons. Also, like with attention seeking, you want to refocus your thoughts and remember like what your purpose for sharing is, like what the end goal needs to be, rather than just like you don't want to be out of the limelight. Because I know a lot of young people struggle with that. They get to a place of feeling important, feeling that the presence is a really valued thing, and so like when they're asked to like let another young person starts doing that advocacy work, or when they start feeling like they're not being heard as much, it can be really kind of scary to step out of that limelight. And so we talk about how to refocus their thoughts and realize this is a natural transition as a young person gets older. And two, definitely the last thing there is just taking a break and taking care of yourself. These things can be really overwhelming. We've seen, and I have also experienced, young people breaking down a panel presentation or at an event where they just become really overwhelmed because of all the different advocacy work that they've been doing. So we talk about those issues in there. Now, some of the positive reasons for sharing is like self-advocacy, advocating for your own personal needs and goals. This would be, for example, like attending an IEP meeting or attending a case management meeting, things like that about your own personal things, preparing for your court date, that kind of stuff. It's important to know how to effectively tell individuals like what you need without being angry or without doing things in a way that can be detrimental and to your goal. Stigma reduction is a huge thing. Stigma can cause many horrible things for young people. A lot of discrimination issues and stuff are all centered around this. And so when we see young people who have experiences with mental health systems, juvenile justice systems, working in the communities with like the Boys and Girls Club or working with Relay for Life and those different things, this really helps reduce that stigma. And so young people self-identify as being from those different child serving systems, and then doing advocacy work within their communities to really reduce that stigma that people have around young people who are systems involved. And then we have community advocacy work. This is where young people use their voice to advocate for changes in their community. These are all some of the positive reasons for sharing that we talk about much more in depth in our guide. But we also discuss about how a positive reason can lead into a negative one if you're not careful, and what to do to prevent that from happening. And then the next slide here is also like the next section of the guide where we talk about the weighing out the benefits and the risk of sharing your story with folks. And so we really want young people to be better prepared with whether they're okay with sharing parts of their story or things about their personal experiences, and whether they're not okay with sharing those things. And this really depends on a variety of factors. I mean, so some of the things that we talk about with the benefits of sharing is, there's many people that can learn from your story, and some of those folks are, for example, like policymakers, people who work in the court system, whether that's for like personal, like your own case management stuff, or whether that's for a much broader base, like court improvement programs and things like that, where you're training lawyers and judges and how they can better serve young people in care. These are all folks, as well as volunteers, mentors, teachers, foster parents, coaches, basically anybody who works with young people or advocates on their behalf should be hearing and should be trained by young people about what that's like to be in the system. And so that's why education is so crucially important. In addition to that, just educating other advocates. A lot of national coalitions and things like that are looking for youth voice, looking for young people to participate on their boards of directors, and these kind of things, because their stories, their input is so valuable to creating change. Those are all different kinds of examples there. Some other benefits of sharing are our stories can really help inspire that action. So legislators, we can get them to vote for certain policies or practices. We can also train service providers on how to better work with young people. And then encouraging recruitment efforts, encouraging people to become mentors, volunteers, foster parents, things like that, to work with other young people. So we really have the ability to get people motivated to either step up and do something, to vote for a certain change, or just to become better prepared to work with young people in this population. And then also, just like I said before, with the stigma reduction and changing the public's perspective about youth that you represent. So like if you're a youth with juvenile justice experience and you're out there as a leader in the community now, people really can see that there's that youth aren't necessarily confined to one particular way of life because of the system that they're involved in. Some additional benefits, not just for the community, but also for yourself and your own personal growth and development. Sharing our stories as young people really provides us an opportunity to be heard by folks. So we can network, developing skills and relationships that help us later in life. So with self-advocacy, we make people aware of our individual needs, what are some of the struggles and things that we're experiencing that folks could possibly help out with. For example, I aged out of foster care, and I didn't know about ETV vouchers or Chafee dollars until I started doing advocacy work, and I was made aware of those issues because I was sharing my experience with an audience once, and then the state independent living director happened to be there and helped link me up with some services for my senior year. Allows us to connect with individuals that can help improve our futures. So we get to get integrated with different mentors or volunteers and things like that that can help promote us as individuals, give us letter of recommendations, maybe even someone who can help us access services for housing. You never know the type of people that you're going to meet when doing this work. And another great benefit that it has is it really provides us with opportunities for gaining additional skills that will definitely set us apart from other folks in the workforce. Having great presentation skills is definitely important for almost any work setting, and being able to utilize different formats, such as PowerPoints and things like that. These are all things that employers are really looking for, and young people participating in this kind of stuff frequently develop much better skills than their peers would. And lastly, build relationships with supports and peers, and this is more for the social emotional well-being components. A lot of my close friends and colleagues are actually young people who are also in care, because I've had the opportunity to now work with people who really understand my past experiences and where I'm from and things like that. And so for other young people, it really provides them the opportunity to network and integrate with folks that know what those experiences are like and things that they can relate to. So some of the risks of sharing, these are some of the unintended consequences that come up and happens when young people talk about their stories, that we want to make sure that they're aware of. It's not to dissuade them from sharing their stories, just to help them become better aware of some of the things that can happen so they know how to avoid those pitfalls. And so one is personal relationships. This is important because let's say you're sharing your story about how you and your siblings were homeless at one point in time in your lives, and then you lived in your car or whatever. Well, maybe your siblings didn't want people in the community really knowing that, and now you've put their information out there, which could cause a rift between your relationship. Or you might say something about a caregiver, which causes friction between you and that caregiver. So there's all kinds of things that can happen to personal relationships when you do tell your story and advocate. So you want to be aware of some of those things. We talk to young people about how they can avoid some of those unintended consequences. Also, it's in reducing stigma, you do open yourself up to stigmatization. And so when you put your stories out there in a public forum, anyone can access it. In fact, I would encourage you all, when you get off this webinar, to just go online and Google my name, and you can get my entire life story. There's a few mouse clicks. And so when you start doing advocacy work, your information can get out there in a public forum, and it can really open you up for something like discrimination issues. And that's not just with job opportunities and things like that, but it's also with just any other kind of thing. Labeling and stereotyping affects so many different areas of life. Dating, housing, finding housing, so many different components rather than just employment. Some of the other risks that we want to look at is the impacts that it can have on your social and emotional well-being. So not just your relationships and your future, but like how it can impact you as a person. And we talk about a couple different things, and one is sharing remorse. When you put information out there that you really wish that you hadn't, maybe it's because it's impacted a personal relationship of yours, or maybe it's because you didn't really want people to know that. And some of the examples we talk about, like when you're doing attention seeking, one of the negative things that can come up with that is sharing remorse, because you want to really catch people's attention, so maybe you talk a little bit more about an abusive situation that you had experienced, and now you kind of wish you hadn't said that to so many people. So there's that kind of thing that can come up, and bringing up those painful memories sometimes can really cause individuals to be triggered negatively by things. So we want to make sure that young people are aware of that. One of the things that happens to a lot of young people is they start talking and sharing their stories constantly on a regular basis, and it's like being overexposed. So it's like being out in the cold without the appropriate Arctic gear and things like that to keep you warm and keep you safe. And so when you're sharing your stories like that, you're bringing up all these painful memories and those kind of things. You can quickly become overwhelmed and be negatively triggered. It's happened to me. I know it's happened to a lot of my colleagues, and so we just want to make sure that young people don't experience these negative things as they're going and aren't re-traumatized in the advocacy work that they do. And also there's a lot of guilt and pressure that gets involved, when you're asked to do something by adults in your life and things, organizations like that. you really feel sometimes that you have to comply, that you have to do these things. And that's not necessarily true. And so we want to let young people know how to deal with that guilt and that pressure, and to let them know that it is okay to say no, and it is okay to step back, and that you don't have to do those things if you don't feel like you can. So the next section after we teach young people in our guide how to kind of weigh out those risks and benefits is how to target the task for the events. So every event that you're going to do is going to be different. There's going to be a different audience. It's going to be a different focus. There's going to be no two events are really the same. And so what we want to do is we want to teach young people how to target their audience, how to study their topic more effectively, how to choose their boundaries, and then how to develop their safety plan. So then our next section of our guide talks about how to do these things. And some of the components that we include with targeting your audience, for example, is identifying who's in your audience and what you feel comfortable telling that particular audience. So let's say your biological family, or whether it's your relatives or fictive kin, or different individuals that are involved in your life, caseworkers, care coordinators, all these people. And you're talking about things like your mental health issues and needs, or your relationship with foster parents, for example. These are all things that can come up as being common things that you would talk about. Well, with your mental health components, you might feel comfortable with your bio family knowing about that. You might even feel comfortable with your therapists, lawyers, those kind of folks that are there to advocate for you knowing about that, as well as just policymakers and things that you want to see like changes on, better services and stuff. So these are all people that you might feel comfortable knowing this information, but maybe you don't really feel that comfortable with like your friends knowing this information, or your other relatives, because it might cause people to develop stigmas around that. So just as another example, like your relationship with your foster parents, you might feel comfortable with your foster family knowing that you have a really close relationship with them, that you really like them. You would feel comfortable with your caseworkers also knowing this information, as they're there to advocate for your needs. And you might feel comfortable with your friends knowing this information as well too. But you might not feel comfortable with like your biological family or your relatives knowing this information, because how they might react to that. It might damage those relationships, because there might be some jealousies, things like that happen that you just want to be aware of. All right, so one of the most important things that we want to let young people know, though, is that when they're talking with the media or with the general public, any information that they put out there to those folks is there for everybody to be able to access. So that would be any information that's put on like Facebook or online, or is discussed with a reporter, those kind of things. Is all stuff that like anybody can have access to. So you want to be very careful with what you're choosing to share in those settings. All right, so with studying your topic, what we want young people to be able to do is to understand how to relate their story to their topic. And I think someone is unmuted. I'm hearing some background noises and such. So if you just turn your mic down or mute. Sorry, anyway. So studying your topic, we want young people to know how to relate their personal story and experiences to the topic that's happening. So this part of the guide, we want to talk to young people about being real and being safe. Like if this particular engagement or event doesn't really relate to you, doesn't really relate to your experience, be real about that and just say like, this probably isn't the event for me because I don't really have a background in that. Also, to be safe, if this event or something is something that like is really something that could be a trigger for you, it's around an issue that you're really passionate about, but you're not really ready to talk about those things because you're still dealing with some of those issues, be real about that too, and be safe and take a back seat on that one. So it's really a lot like targeting what your point and what your purpose is. You want to hit that particular goal. So you want to target your audience with this as well too. Identify how your story best relates to that audience. So if you're talking to a group of potential foster parents or to a group of case managers, you want to talk about your experience with foster parents, your experiences with case managers, and how, the good things and the bad things that happen with those experiences. Um, you also want to interpret things for your audience. A lot of times when we're telling our stories, we might say things like, well, I had an adoption, but my adoption disrupted. Now, when people hear that, there might be a common belief that your adoption disrupted because of your behavioral issues that went on that. But it could be, physical health issues of your adoptive parents. Maybe they were your grandparents and like they couldn't physically take care of you in their home. There's a multitude of reasons why your adoption could have disrupted. So you want to make sure that you let your audience know that. I know a lot of times for young people that come into foster care, they say that people assume it's through like juvenile justice reasons when like 80% or more actually come into foster care because of abuse and neglect. So these are the kind of things that you want to interpret for your audience. And the importance of teaching young people how to study their own personal stories and how their stories relate to their particular audience and all that, it makes them sound much more credible, which then makes people listen to them more and be more inspired to create those changes. So when you do those kinds of things effectively, you're really going to be able to avoid all those pitfalls, dodge all those obstacles, and hit your mark. You're going to be able to hit that target in a really effective manner. So the next section that we talk about in our guide is how to choose boundaries appropriately. So let's say you target your audience, you study your topic, you know how everything relates. Now you have to choose what particular experiences of your life you are comfortable with sharing with those particular audiences. And so you want to take the time to really yield and think about what you're comfortable doing. And so you're thinking back about who's in the audience and deciding what you want to share with them and then saying what you need to say, right? Actually not so much saying what you need to say, it's saying what really needs to be said. It's much more important to stick to your goal, your purpose of sharing, all those kind of overarching things. Because a lot of times we can get really off track in saying just what's on our mind. So what we want to teach young people to do more effectively is relating their personal stories and experiences and advocating towards an end goal or an end purpose, and not just sharing kind of like their thoughts about different experiences. We want it to be much more focused, because when it's more focused, young people are better prepared with the components of what they're sharing, so not just putting out unnecessary information for people to have access to. So we definitely want to increase the focus because it builds towards the purpose and it keeps them better protected. But sometimes when sharing your story, you want to remember that you're not using this particular event or speech or panel presentation that you're on to talk about a difficult emotional issue that you haven't previously addressed in a therapeutic setting first. It can feel so nice sometimes for people to listen to what it is that you have to say, that you can start just sharing those life experiences in an unfocused manner, and you can start talking about things that are still really emotionally raw. And this is something that can definitely negatively trigger your emotional stability. So we really want to be able to avoid this from happening. But sometimes things come up, and if you feel that a particular experience is going to be really impactful at achieving your goal, and you really want to share that, then you need to take the time to prepare. So this is a little rhyme we came up for that, which says, if you feel the need to share, then take the time to prepare. It's really just a couple of steps. First, you want to try to talk to a counselor. Get in there and see them and talk to them about like your concerns about sharing this particular experience with an audience, and kind of vet things out through them. Second, develop your safety plan, and we talk about this really in depth in the guide about how to do this really effectively. And lastly here is take ownership of the emotion. Realize that you might be triggered by that. Have all these safety plans in place so that, like, before, after, and during the events, you're supported, and you can even let your audience know, hey, this is something that's difficult for me to talk about, and so like I might start tearing up or even crying, and I just want you guys to bear with me because I think it's important for you to know this information. And so taking ownership of that emotion sometimes is really helpful, so it doesn't kind of sneak up on you. All right. So developing your safety plan is something we go into more in depth in the guide as well, but it's about identifying your triggers. So what are the things that trigger you, emotionally? How your supportive adults or peer can be effective at helping to support you during that. So like during the event, if they see you being triggered, what is it that you want them to do to handle the situation, things like that. Identifying good coping mechanisms for after the event, so that you don't regress to doing things like drinking or doing drugs if that's an issue from your past. Because I mean those things are coping mechanisms, but they're not positive ones. So once we identify positive coping mechanisms and know what our negative ones are, and have the supports to access the positive ones, and then just really developing a plan around that, and actually then practicing that plan, putting that plan in motion before the event happens, and then what you're going to do after the event to kind of meet those needs in a safe and effective manner. And so keeping those things in mind when developing your safety plan, we go through this step-by-step process in our guide. So one of the last sections of our guide is really provide some general tips on being strategic, how to do these things more effectively, and one of the things we talk about is answering difficult questions and what you can do to kind of process questions from the audience. You would be surprised at some of the questions you can get as a young person being up on a panel or giving a speech. And one is you want the ability to be able to redirect the question. So if it doesn't relate to your topic and it's about like personal information that you don't really feel like divulging, we teach young people through examples around how they can reword or redirect those questions so that they relate back to the subject matter that they're there for. Some of the tactics we talk about is like opening up to the group, rewording the question to relate to the topic, and just politely declining. We would talk about these different strategies that young people can employ to be able to effectively answer difficult questions without triggering themselves and being polite throughout the process. We also talk about what to do after the event is over, which is really like the debriefing process of everything. So really what to do around assessing like the strengths and needs. This is assessing additional triggers that came up that maybe you weren't aware of beforehand, or whether it is just technical things, like maybe you were speaking too low and the people in the back of the auditorium like didn't hear you, and so what you can do to improve your skill sets to make you more effective, and also identifying, like I said, those additional triggers and things like that to keep you safer. So identifying those strengths and needs. Remembering them not to get addicted to sharing their stories, and not to like get too overexposed and share so much that they are reopening up old wounds and things like that, and really tearing themselves down emotionally. And then talking about how you can take a break and do those things to take care of yourself in that process. So these are all kind of things that we cover much more in depth. So some additional features of our guide. The last section of it is around developing your bio. So a lot of the things that organizations will ask young people when they ask them to participate in an event is they want to get a bio from them. And a bio is just a short little highlight reel, I guess, of like your life and your experiences that you want to make sure is information that you're okay with folks knowing, and information that's needs to be like tailored to different events and different audiences. And so we provide a place for young people to kind of put some of those things in there and practice like writing different bios out based upon different situations. After each section, we also have We also have sectional quizzes that young people will respond to after they finish the section to test them on their comprehension of the knowledge. And in the back of our guide, we'll have an answer sheet for all that with explanations about the answers and why those particular answers are best suited for those questions, to give people the opportunity to learn through actually like doing and responding to those kind of things. And then personal answer opportunities, which is really just as we run through a couple different scenarios in our quizzes around, what is Tom's reason for sharing this experience at this particular event. And then so we want young people to have the opportunity to identify what their own personal reason is for sharing overall. So we have a section for that as well too, where young people can respond to those questions in addition to the ones that we've listed. Lastly, like I promised, here are some additional resources for you all to take home with you. And I apologize, looks like the bottom one got clipped off there. But these are some of the things that we also have mentioned in our guide too, where young people can access some additional guides around strategic sharing, but not just strategic sharing, also things like public speaking and things like that can help them become better advocates, whether it's for doing their own case management advocacy work or whether it's for doing national advocacy work as well too. So these are some additional resources that folks can access for that. And with that, I believe we're actually going to wrap up. Oh, Tiffany, thanks for coming back. I'm glad you thought this guide's going to be helpful. We look forward to having it out in the summer for folks to access and use. And yeah, good luck with sharing your story. So that's going to actually wrap us up, and we've got approximately about 15 minutes or so for some questions from you folks. So if you guys want to go ahead and launch that, I'll field a few questions.
So thanks so much, Eric. There's two ways to ask questions. One is to put a question into the question area chat box. The other is to raise your hand because you're still on mute, and I can unmute you in the order that the questions are asked. So that is in the raise your hand function, where you just click that little icon that's the hand. And like Eric was saying, we are currently just in the process of getting the strategic sharing workbook laid out and ready for actual both print and then online publication. So it's going to be available both on the Youth Move National as well as the Pathways to Positive Futures websites for free downloading for the strategic sharing guide that will include both the worksheets and the answer guides covering the issues that Eric outlined today. So does anybody have any questions or comments that they would like to share? You can wait a little bit.
We really want to encourage that everyone who's involved with the youth advocacy field, that they have their young people fill out this guide, to do this guide, to get them better prepared for sharing their stories and experiences. In addition to that, when you check out the guys from like KC Family Programs and such, they actually do have a training on strategic sharing, so we encourage the young people and their organizations have that training as well.
So Eric, we do have a question about someone asking about the appropriate agendas and usage with this for a youth advisory council.
Right. So I would say for usage for the youth advisory council, when you have young people that are going to be participating in upcoming events, make sure that all the new young people that come on to your council fill out this guide. They do this as part of their initiation process to being on your youth council. And then for every particular event that you guys are going to do, kind of go through the section about targeting your events. Run through that section and make sure you know who's in the audience, how your personal stories relate to that audience, identify the best person from your youth group whose story best relates to that particular audience and experience, and then develop all those necessary components around like your safety plan and all those things to support your fellow peers in doing that advocacy work.
Another question is from somebody who asks, a peer outreach worker is asking this actually, how did you cope when sharing experiences that may have triggered old emotions?
Actually, one of the things that for me, personally, I was actually speaking on a panel presentation to a group of lawyers and judges, and I have been doing a lot of advocacy work. I was actually hired as a youth leader for my youth group, and so I was doing just about every presentation that we had come up, and it was a lot. And as I was telling a story I've told thousands of times before, my eyes started tearing up, my voice started breaking, and I didn't realize what was happening. But I was actually having a breakdown right there on the spot. I started just crying. I couldn't get it under control. And people just kind of stood around and like waited for me to quit crying because they didn't really know how to handle the situation because I didn't have a safety plan developed. So after that, I actually took a break from sharing my experiences and focused on some other things like my schoolwork and stuff like that. And started talking to a mental health counselor to address those issues. So the two ways that I addressed that was I took a break, I stopped doing it, and I started talking to a counselor about those things. And then I made sure to start developing a safety plan for every event that I did to make sure that I was prepared in case that happened again.
Great. Another question that's coming in is, have you ever considered a youth-developed campaign with youth-developed media? I don't know if related to this or just in general, but they're asking about sort of maybe how strategic sharing might play a role in youth-developed media.
I'm not familiar with the concept of youth-developed media. I'm going to assume it's something around kind of like social marketing and awareness. And utilizing strategic sharing in that. Am I on the right page with that, Chris, do you think?
I think so. I mean, just, yeah, sort of like if you're going to have like a YouTube channel or a Facebook page that's youth-driven, that's focused on an organization as opposed to obviously, you know, someone's personal page or something to that effect. Like if the youth are developing the content for something that's media-driven, so therefore is, you know, automatically going to be in the public light.
Right, right. Some suggestions that I would have on that is utilizing only first names, don't utilize last names because it makes it so much easier when you use first and last for someone to find you. So utilizing those first names and kind of rotating those stories so they're up for maybe like 6 months and then they get taken down so that way they're not up there for an undefined amount of time for people just to access, you know, whenever. I would say archive them, archive those stories to put them in a rotation, but don't archive them so that people can access them. This way, if any young person, you know, does have a negative experience where someone saw that information and, you know, there was any issue of like stigma or discrimination or any of those kind of things, they can ask to have that be taken down or taken out of rotation. So those are some of the safety features that I would put in place on that.
Another question is, any tips on how to help young people develop the willingness to be involved in their own lives through strategic sharing?
Yes. One of the things strategic sharing teaches is about like self-advocacy and how that impacts and affects. We have a whole section on self-advocacy work. And in addition to our guide, we actually mentioned resources in there around other guides that have been created on doing that self-advocacy work. What we really point to is we point to those guides to give people those resources and around how advocating for yourself can really promote that positive change that you're trying to gain and achieve in your life, as well as giving you a couple of tips or golden nuggets on how to do that more effectively and really taking ownership of your own experiences rather than just letting things happen to you, but really being a part of that process.
Great. I think, unless I'm missing something, I'm going to just double check. I think that's all the questions we have. So I'd like to thank Eric Lulo for sharing both his own story as well as his knowledge on strategic sharing. And thank you all for attending. this webinar, and this webinar will be available, both the PowerPoint as well as the audio broadcast itself, on the Pathways RTC website. And the Strategic Sharing Guide, like I said, will be out sometime this summer. And thank you very much, everybody, for attending, and have a lovely day. Bye-bye.